Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our WSP and ATR workshop. Just a few house rules quickly. Could you please keep your laptops on mute? If you would like, you can keep your cameras off as well. So yeah, welcome. Today we'll be discussing our WSP and ATR submissions. As you know, it's due within the next couple of weeks, and it should really be top of mind for you right now. So my name is Nadia Smith. I head up our customized division for CBM training. And with me today, I've got Tshephe and Mashadi Monaledi. They are experts in the SD and the EE field and the BEE field, actually. So they're quite all-rounders when it comes to skills development. They will be assisting today, and they will be running through the WSP and the ATR, the importance of your SDF and what their role is. If you have any questions for them, could you please pop it for me into the message section, and we will address them at the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session. I'm Mashadi Monaledi, as Nadia already said.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tshephe, and we really appreciate you joining us on today's session.
We're looking forward to a very fruitful and engaged conversation. So do keep your questions in the messaging area coming. We look forward to actually answering those as we go along.
And our answers will, as Nadia has already indicated, we are able to expand our answers into EE questions, also into BBEE, because that's what we typically do on a day-to-day running of our entities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So I guess then we can turn the camera off. Okay, we've just turned our camera off for the benefit of bandwidth and to make sure that everyone hears us. As Nadia has said, today's conversation is really around doing a successful submission of the workplace skills plan and the annual training report to the multitude of SETAs that we have available in South Africa. So basically the reason for this conversation that we're having is that as skills development professionals, we've noted that a skilled workforce is really a key ingredient in ensuring that an organization actually grows and it's competitive against other service providers within the field that is in. Having said that, though, it's also a bit of a challenging field to maneuver, particularly when you're not knowledgeable around skill development and how to lever the different resources that are available. So this webinar is meant to shed some light on how do you navigate the skills development space, and certainly how do you then also lever the resources that are available to ensure that you have a skilled workforce and that it doesn't come at a significant cost to your business. So we get started. First, just about the agenda. We want to chat firstly about the objectives of skills development. That will be our foundation. Then we'll chat about the South African landscape, so skills development legislation and how it impacts on you as employers and what your particular role is. Then we're going to chat a little bit about the parties who are actually responsible for skills development. I think oftentimes we've got a very narrow view of who is responsible for it. So we'll go into that before then chatting about what resources do you have to lever. So skills development funding, how does it work? And how do you then actually get the resources around that as well? And then we'll talk a little bit about the role of a skills development facilitator. So a skills development facilitator is a professional who actually helps a business become skills savvy and skills fit so that they actually meet the goals of the business. Then we're going to chat a little bit about the process of compiling and submitting the workplace skills plan and the annual training report, which is due very, very soon, as Nadia said. So the objectives of skills development. Ultimately, skills development is really about... Oh, hi, Pandi, how are you? Oh. Won't you please put yourself on mute for us?
Oh.
Okay. So basically... Okay, sorry about that short interruption. We've just muted everyone so that we're all able to hear. But I think in summary, skills development is really about building the necessary skills and ensuring that the workforce that we have as employers, but on a greater scale in the South African economy, is actually has the skill set to do what they need to do at work. It enables people to also find decent work with higher wages, with the ability to actually support their families. And
tell me, in terms of say
sorry about that. We keep having someone who is unmuting themselves. Please do not unmute yourself or else we can't hear properly. As I said, so skills development is really about creating a workforce that is capable of taking the South African economy to the next level, but also to ensure that the organizations that people actually work in benefit from the skills that they've got. In addition to that, it also helps us with the unemployment question, which I think that is a burning question right now, particularly around young people who finding themselves having done or completed matric, but are unable to find work because the schooling system hasn't necessarily prepared them for what the economy requires in terms of the skill sets that employers are actually looking for. So it aims to empower these guys with the skills so that they can actually find work. They are actually more employable than when they first started their learnings. It also invariably increases the chances of these individuals actually finding work and becoming productive members of society. So that's in a nutshell the objectives. And then we're just going to quickly go into skills development legislation. I think as a foundation for us, it's important to understand what the legislation actually says around skills development. There are a number of key legislations or legislations that are specifically geared towards skills development. Today, we're going to be discussing the top 3. And these are the Skills Development Act and its regulations, the Skills Development Levies Act, as well as the National Qualifications Framework Act. Just to get started, so the Skills Development Act, which is basically the foundation upon which all the others rest, is an act that's meant to very actively develop and improve the skill set of the South African workforce, to improve productivity, but to also enhance socioeconomic well-being through enhancing the skills of the people in the country with the view of actually making them employable and being able to find meaningful and decent work. The Act really uses 4 mechanisms for actually bringing these purpose to fruition. Firstly, it implements what's called the National Skills Authority, as well as the 21 sector education and training authorities that exist. And these parties together actually form the bodies that implement skills development. It actually makes provision for the National Skills Fund as well, which is part of the mechanism for funding skills development within the country. It also makes provision for the Skills Development Levy Grant Scheme, which we'll go to in a little bit, but basically what that does is that it provides funding for skills development. And then it is the legislation that speaks specifically to how then does South Africa move forward in planning for skills, not only for now, but for the future skills that would actually be required. This legislation has an impact on different organizations and certainly employers. It basically ensures that there's funding for training, and it sets out how then organizations actually gain that funding. It gives employers and other organizations the opportunity to give input into the national skills development strategy, and then it enables workplaces to become areas of learning. So instead of people just coming to work, they can actively be learning while actually doing work in a very, very structured and fruitful way. Then the next act is the Skills Development Levies Act. And the Skills Development Levies Act is essentially a mechanism of collecting funds for skills development specifically. And it is there to close the gaps in skills between the different socioeconomic players within our society. So whether it's high income earners or families who find themselves being economically marginalized, this act is to specifically collect a pot of money that would be used for skills development for all parties involved in the South African workforce. And it does so by having what's called a mandatory skills development levy. So all companies that have an annual payroll of over 500,000 rands would pay a skills development levy, and portions of that money would go to different implementers of skills development. This is generally collected by SARS, who then disperses it to the different SETAs themselves. The impact on the organization and employer specifically is that employers have no choice but to pay the skills development levy if they reach the threshold of 500,000 rands per annum in payroll. But it also means that companies can claim back some of those funds, but they can only claim it back in order to implement skills development in their environments. And then it also puts the onus on companies to actually submit what is called a workplace skills plan and annual training report, which we'll also speak about shortly. All right, sorry about this, but this is labeled incorrectly. It's meant to be the National Qualifications Framework Act. And basically what the Framework Act is around is that it is the framework which creates an integrated framework for learning achievements. So if you look at qualifications, for instance, they are created using the National Qualifications Framework.
Yeah.
And then the different qualifications would fall under different organizations, or what's called sub-frameworks for different NQF levels. For instance, we've got the General and Further Education and Training sub-framework, which would be school essentially. And then you've got the Higher Education Qualifications, which would look at tertiary education. And then there's the occupational qualifications as well, which would be more technical areas of operation. But basically, this act sets out quite clearly how a qualification is actually structured, what makes up a qualification, and how a person would go about actually acquiring that particular qualification. It makes sure that there's a standard way of delivering training, but there's also a standard way of measuring competence around those particular areas of study, regardless of what they may be. Okay, great. And then the next area that we're going to be chatting about is who are the parties who are actually responsible for skills development. I think I've already touched on it. So there's the sector education and training authorities, but there's also us as employers. We play a very, very big part in it. If we're talking about sector education and training authorities, these are juristic bodies that are created under the Skills Development Act, and their primary purpose is to promote skills development and improve the skills levels in different sectors. So the reason that there's a sector in front of it is that each one of the SETAs is responsible for a particular sector that they would then actually create skills around for. And SETAs have two primary functions. Firstly, they need to identify and address the needs, the skills needs within the different sectors. So they compile what's called a sector skills plan, and they do this from data that they've actually collected from employers such as ourselves. They administer what's called skills development grants to different employers. They also establish and promote learnerships and provide special schemes for special areas of skill sets that are required. In addition to that, the SETAs are actually a quality assurance body for the education, training, and qualifications assurance body. And what they do is that they accredit training providers. So remember that because training, particularly formal training, comes with, excuse me there. Just gonna mute again. All right.
Perfect.
And we're back. Sorry about the interruption. They also actually give different training providers accreditation for delivering, assessing, and moderating specific qualifications. So not everyone can actually deliver, monitor, and deliver, assess, and moderate qualifications. You have to get a special permission from the SETA for every one of the courses or interventions that you're actually providing. Right. So I was talking about the multitude of SETAs that actually exist. You can see there on the board or on your screen that there's about 21 SETAs that exist, and each one of them is responsible for a part of the industry. So if you're in the IT field, for instance, or even media, you would belong to the media, advertising, and information and communications technology sectors. That's a mouthful. If you are in retail, for instance, you would belong to the retail SETA. If you're in bead making, for instance, you would belong to the fiber processing and manufacturing sector, or one of the related sectors. So there's a multitude of them. But basically, every employer who contributes a skills development levy contributes to one of these SETAs. Not every employer is actually aware of which SETA they belong to. I would advise that you actually call SARS, because they would be the party that would know which SETA you belong to. I know some SDFs say that you should check what's called your SIC code, but the SIC code is decided upon when you first register your business, and it's decided upon by whomever is registering the business. So you could find yourself in construction where you are actually in retail. So the best place to go to is actually SARS, to just check where is that levy going for you. Right. And then the other important party in skills development is actually employers themselves. Firstly, we provide data on the industry skills needs. So the sector skills plan that the SETAs develop is based on data that we provide to them in terms of what are the critical skills that we are actually requiring that we're not able to actually find within our immediate environments when we're trying to recruit. But also, employers actually fund skills development through the skills development levy. They also play a critical role, because oftentimes if you look at learnerships and you look at training interventions that are being taken on by employees, workplaces actually become places of learning. And finally, they're actually an implementing agent for skills development and learning. And I'll explain to you how that actually works. But in a nutshell, the SETAs do not actually deliver any training. What they do is that they provide grants to employers and to other organizations who then act as implementing agents for training. And then in summary, I just wanted to touch on the special relationship between the SETAs and employers when it comes to skills development. As I said, the SETAs create what's called a sector skills plan, but they collect the data that they use for the plan is actually from employers. In addition to that, the SETAs also approve what's called workplace skills plan. And those workplace skills plans are actually given to the SETA by employers. SETAs also allocate funding for training and education, and then employers are actually implementing agents that then use that funding to implement training either for their own staff or unemployed people. The SETA also monitors education and training. So at the end of interventions, you'll find that SETAs would want some sort of report around what interventions actually took place, what was the value of that. And that's to actually ensure that training and skills development is taking place constantly within workplaces, but within other areas as well. So the relationship is quite a close one. And I think that as employers, we need to get much closer than we currently are to our specific SETAs so that we don't only get the benefits of being in close contact with the SETAs, but we actually understand our particular role within skills development. It's not just up to the SETAs. As I said, we are the implementing agents, and we need to take that job quite seriously. So I think the big question now, money, 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 is how does an employer actually lever skills development funding to improve the skills of their existing workforce, but to also improve the skill sets of job seekers, so people who find themselves unemployed. I think I just said this, but money, 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 money. We fund skills development, and we do so through the skills development levy, and SARS collects this money and disperses it to the SETAs as well as the National Skills Fund, which we'll chat about again shortly as well. So you've got your 1% payroll that you contribute to or you give over to SARS as your skills development levy. This is how it's actually distributed. 20% of it goes to the National Skills Fund. The National Skills Fund is a fund specifically for higher education. So a lot of this money would go to the universities, to the universities of technology, and those particular areas, yes. And then there's money that actually goes to the SETAs. So if you look at the middle here, this is money that actually goes to the SETA. It's just broken down into what the SETA would actually do with it. So 80% of your skills development levy goes to the SETA. So if you're contributing 10 rands, 8 rands of that is going to the SETA. And then the SETA uses it for mandatory grants. It uses it for discretionary grants, but it also uses it for administration. So keeping the SETA going on a month-to-month basis, on a year-to-year basis. So in summary, 80% of the skills development levy is actually contributed to the SETA. 10.5% of this is used for the administration, and 69% of it is available to the SETA to give as grants. And then they use the mandatory grant as well as the discretionary grant, as I previously mentioned. And then how do you then get that money? Let's see. So there are 2 types of grants that the SETAs would award to employers. There's the mandatory grant, and then there's the discretionary grant. I'm going to start chatting about the mandatory grant first. So the mandatory grant is the amount of money that is allocated to employers that are skills development levy payers. In order to qualify for the mandatory grant, a company needs to submit a workplace skills plan and an annual training report by the 30th of April every year. Last year was a bit of a funny one because of COVID. We wound up having extensions up to the 30th of July. But I think this year they're definitely going to stick to the 30th of April.
So we literally have 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks to do so. Many employers actually miss out on the mandatory grant because they're not even aware that it actually exists. So it's only bigger companies or companies that actually actively engage and are aware of the skills development landscape that would submit the workplace skills plan and their annual training report to the SETA that they're registered to, so that they can actually get the mandatory grant. And what generally happens is whatever amount of money is not claimed by employers as mandatory grants is then put aside and it's put into a pot with the discretionary grant. So we're chatting about the workplace skills plan and annual training report, and I just want to tell you what they are. So the workplace skills plan is essentially a plan of training that's going to take place over a year's period from the 1st of April to the 31st of March in the next year. And the important information that's derived from that by the SETA is who is actually receiving training in terms of the demographics, how much companies are actually spending on this training, and also to track the sectoral skills needs, because it's assumed that if a company is spending a large chunk of money on a particular skill, then it must be a skill that is in demand for that particular organization. So that data is then aggregated to establish what are the in-demand skills that are required, so that the SETA can actually put focus on those particular skills and actually fund interventions to close those skills gaps. And then there's the annual training report. And the annual training report is a report of what training has actually taken place in the previous year. Again, from the 1st of April until the 31st of March. And it really measures the same thing. The demographics of people who were trained, the costs of the training. Hi guys, we're back now. Sorry about that. So we were just chatting about what a workplace skills plan and an annual training report is. We're now going to move on to then how does a company go about submitting these documents. So most SETAs have a learner management system that is online, and submissions need to be done online unless explicitly stated by that particular SETA. In order to actually submit, you need to have a full list of your employees with all their demographic data. So if you've ever done like an employee equity report, all that information needs to be there. And then you obviously need a list of training interventions that you did as a company in the past year, along with evidence. So evidence, and we'll go into it now, but it's stuff that you use to prove it. So invoices, certificates, registers, and the likes would form part of evidence. And then you have to have a schedule of planned training. And you have to have costed that training, so that when the SETA actually looks at your submission, they can say, Mashadi wants to go do an end user course, and the end user course costs 8,000 rands. Shall we approve this or not? SETAs are somewhat lenient around well, actually they're not lenient at all around extending submission dates. So the cutoff is certainly the 31st of April, unless a company submits motivation and actually requests an extension for the submission. But that can only be done up until the 31st of March, which has already passed.
Yes.
So any company that is looking to submit absolutely has to do it on the 31st of April. And then a key area that we need to discuss is then how does an employer decide what skills they're going to be building in the next year? A good workplace skills plan is one that's informed by the skills needs of the organization at that time, and also well into the future. So if you think in the next 5 years, what will the skills that are required be in the different areas of that particular business? In order to get to that, you need to know what the skills that are available in your organization are, as they relate to the roles that people are actually conducting. So you would need to do what's called a skills audit. And then once you've done the skills audit, you then submit, well, you compile and then submit the workplace skills plan. In order to submit, as I said, you need quite a bit of documentation. There's the company registration, there's banking details, there's the declaration form actually declaring that what is provided as information to the SETA is actually true. You need to provide proof of training, as I said, invoices, registers, certificates. The whole shebang needs to actually be provided to the SETA as proof that you've actually conducted training. Now, this is important because when you submit the workplace skills plan or the annual training report, it actually needs to be in alignment to what you had planned to train in the previous year, or there needs to be some sort of justification as to why the company diverted from that. Was the company going through a challenging time? Was there disruptive technology that then required them to gain a skill that was not anticipated? What is the reasoning for it? Because the workplace skills plan should be able to cater for what the organization requires. And then another type of grant is what's called the discretionary grant. And discretionary grant is open to all employers that want to deliver training to their staff members as well as unemployed people to meet scarce and critical skills needs. Different SETAs have different windows, so there is no set time that that a company would apply for funding. It is entirely up to the SETAs themselves. And as I said, there's 21 of them, so you'll have to keep a very close eye on your specific one. In order to qualify for a discretionary grant, a company must be registered. It must be tax compliant. It must have a valid bank account, and it must have a BEE certificate. Because it's discretionary, the funding is not guaranteed. Not all employers that actually apply for it will get it. But because lots of employers also do not actually apply for discretionary grant, there's more in the pot than what you would anticipate as a levy paying employer. But having said that, I think in the last year or two, funding has gone down quite significantly from the SETAs. And I'm going to let Ian just chat about that for a little bit.
So basically, because of the realities in terms of our economic growth, that didn't just start last year. We have been in a technical recession for some time right now. There's been a lot of retrenchments. Our unemployment rates, it's just under 35%. Almost 40% of the youth are unemployed. Companies are not recruiting. The growth trajectory of many companies has been stagnant. So what it means is that the contribution that ordinarily would have been received by the SETAs has drastically gone down. And therefore, that creates a difficult process when accessing grants or funding from the SETAs. And secondly, there is a reality that we are dealing with in the country where there is the question of higher education funding, which is persistent and creating a hostile environment, and where government is battling to actually provide a solution around that. And it is clear as we move on throughout the year that majority, or there is voices that are coming and lobbying government to really take the funding from the SETAs or the money from the SETAs and use it to fund what we call the fall list, the fees must fall. So basically the funding based on the economic climate that we've been experiencing the past 3 or 5 years and the pressure that government has in terms of the fiscus, the reality is that you could draw a conclusion that if we don't collect taxes, if we have less than 5 million people paying taxes, if we have high numbers of retrenchments, unemployment rate, simply means the contribution to SARS, which then will allocate to the various SETAs, has also been materially affected. So what it says is that the landscape is very competitive from your industry players. The landscape is also very, very difficult to navigate from the SETA's perspective, because they are getting a lot of pushbacks, particularly from the government, but also they are not getting a lot of allocation from SARS, because SARS is not collating a lot of funds. So in that regard, colleagues, we are dealing with the realities of having an economy that is not growing. As a result, it does have an effect on the application that the SETAs receive, or the approval of the application that the SETA receives. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay.
That was a mouthful, but I think very good points made there. In order to submit your discretionary grant application, you either do it online or manually, depending on what your SETA actually requires. The documents that you would need is quite similar to when you're submitting the workplace skills plan. This company registration, tax clearance, proof of banking, BE, company share certificate, as well as your CSD registration number. Because if you're getting funding from SETA, even though it's technically your money, you're still considered an agent or a company that's providing services to the state, because these are state related companies. Okay, and now with regards to the training that's funded by SETA, so the SETAs provide funding for both formal training. Formal would be qualifications that are NQF aligned. That means that they either a part of a qualification, or they are a whole qualification in themselves. And that could be diplomas, degrees, higher certificates, those types of things. And then with regards to the interventions, these would be the way that one would get the qualification. So there's learnerships, there's apprenticeships, there's skills programs, there's bursaries for diplomas and degrees and the likes. And then there's also informal training, which is training that does not culminate in a qualification and is not recognized by a particular SETA. However, it is still considered an important skill for employees to have. But a big chunk of funding goes to formal training. And then there's the role of the skills development facilitator. So a skills development facilitator is a person who helps you navigate the space of skills development. They would be the ones who typically do the workplace skills plan, as well as the annual training report compilation, as well as submission. They make sure that they advise and implement training interventions that are in line with what the company needs in terms of B-BBEE, but also in terms of what the trajectory of the company is, what skills are actually required. So we would conduct a skills analysis to establish what skills are actually existing in the business, what gaps exist in the business, and then provide advice on how then do you best close those particular gaps. They're also there to promote a culture of learning and to develop development plans for different staff members. So they play a very, very critical role. And my advice would be that if you are embarking on a skills development journey, find yourself a good skills development facilitator. It doesn't have to be a permanent head, but even someone who helps you temporarily is always good.
And just to add on that, Mashadi, I think with the tough times that we are currently faced with, for organizations that have an SDF, not necessarily being an HR manager, I would urge those organizations to really have skills development facilitators sitting in ESCO meetings or strategic decision meetings, because the reality is that most SDFs are left behind when businesses are planning a strategy in terms of what skill we need, how we're going to grow this business. Right at the end, when we have to talk about the process of the SETAs and the submission, then we start recognizing the SDF. But actually the SDF plays a very critical role from when the organization wants to grow or expand or go through a reorganization. You need to have an SDF sitting in that table. Don't just wait for SDF when you are about to submit, because it's not a clerical position. It's not an administrative role. It's a highly skilled strategic role that needs to play a very, very strategic role in the growth of the business. So let's just start having conversation with the ESCO to say, I want an SDF in the ESCO table. Yeah.
All right. And then we're going to do a little bonus for 5 minutes or 2 minutes. And the bonus is around how do you then do a proper skills audit? So you know exactly what skills are in the business and what skills gaps exist. I'm going to skip over this because I think we're running out of time. But basically, if you're conducting a skills audit, the first thing you need is to understand the tasks that each person actually does. And once you understand the tasks, then you understand the skills that they require to actually complete those tasks. And then you measure whether those particular individuals actually have the skills to complete those tasks. So you collect your data and then you do desktop analysis and you come up with what's called a skills gap matrix. And a skills gap matrix will tell you that Mashadi in accounts really needs Excel skills and she doesn't have them. So that's a gap that we need to close. Let's put it in our workplace skills plan as something that we can work towards training or providing to her so she's as good at her job as she can possibly be. We then collate all the findings and then we make recommendations on how to close the gaps. So if you look at training, I think we've traditionally thought that training is people sitting in a classroom absorbing knowledge. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. I think we've moved past that, especially with the advent of COVID, but certainly with the technological revolution that we're finding ourselves in, that there's different ways of learning and we don't necessarily need to be stuck in a classroom. There's soundbite courses that you can do for 5 minutes at a time. There's online content, there's YouTube, there's a multitude of tools that are available. And it's a matter of actually finding those that are most appropriate for the business, that are most cost effective for the business. And you prioritize around those and then you implement your skills development.
I can assure you for organizations that don't do skills audit, there is a link between lack of productive employees to the bottom line of the business. We see skills audit as a laborious exercise, but the return of investment of skills audit is that you are an efficient employer. You are able to plan, you are able to do proper budgeting, you are able to prioritize, you are able to hit your numbers because you could have X number of employees, but are you sure that those employees are doing what you want to achieve? Are they the right people to take you to the next level? So the bedrock of everything when it comes to learning and development, we feel is the skills audit. It will now link to your BBBEE, it will link to your funding, it will link to your growth strategy or sales strategy. Everything is centered around skills audit in any other organization. So I would want to urge you to take it quite seriously going forward, especially when we have a tight budget or the rent is low, as they say it. Skills audit will ensure that you sustain the pandemic times as we are navigating through them. Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Skip over this as well. I think what another thing that's important just before we start taking questions is that the submission of the workplace skills plan and the approval thereof by the SETA is directly linked to your BBBEE. if those documents are not available, if you cannot provide evidence that you have submitted those documents, then your skills development spend is not admissible as skills development spend in BBBEE terms.
Correct, correct. It's quite crucial. There is no exemption clause. When you ought to have been submitting and you did not submit, the verification agencies will not be kind to that. And again, Mashadi has emphasized on the need to have solid source evidence. And you can see throughout the process, if you don't have sufficient or good quality of documents or evidence, then the whole process that we're embarking on, it falls apart. So from the smallest attendance register, it needs to be clear, it needs to be specific, it needs to give a story, it needs to be complete, because a lot of documents are not complete. And that, with the SETA not having sufficient to go around, they will use every
as a tool
not to appear.
Yeah.
So you can't be inputting information or data incorrectly. You can't be inputting data that you don't have backup documentation on that. You can't just capture information without understanding why you are capturing it, because the SETAs will come back more than ever now with lots of questions. You need to be able to respond to questions. What were you doing here? How did you do this? What was the reason behind that? If you don't have any of that locked in a system that is very effective, efficient, you are at risk of not being approved for any granting grants or even the WSP and ATR.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Alrighty.
That concludes the presentation. So I'm going to hand over to you, Nadia, for the questions.
Oh, there's no question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Why don't we have questions?
That's a good thing or a bad thing.
If there is anyone that have any questions, if you could pose them now, you don't have to put it into the message box, you can ask it directly.
It's not.
Okay, perhaps if there are questions to follow maybe tomorrow, feel free to send through your questions to Nadia, and or Julio will be able to respond accordingly.
And thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. I hope that this has been useful.
Sorry, can I just ask one question, please?
Sure, Barbara.
I wonder if you can just tell me, you've said that you can look at at the source to find out which SETA you belong to.
Yes.
But is there a possibility for an organization to switch SETAs or move from one SETA to another?
Yes, absolutely. So an organization can move from the SETA from April until June. That's the window. It's called an inter-SETA transfer. So you can certainly do it if you're finding that your organization is not in the industry that the SETA you're registered in is.
And what is the process to do that, if you know?
So you would need to contact your particular SETA. There's documents that they would then ask you to complete. You then submit those to the SETA that you want to actually move to.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. And just to add on that, it's not usually an easy, smooth process. Mm-hmm. You would need to have a little bit of patience around that and a lot of follow-ups. It sounds easy when they talk about it, but when you start actually implementing it, yeah.
I think it's like with everything
It's like with everything with the SETAs.
Until you do
it. Yeah. So when you need to submit for this particular year, make sure that you submit with the SETA that you are with. Let that process run its course. Then post-submission, it's only when, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you start.
That's best.
Yeah. inter-SETA transfers, because you don't want to have questions of your submission was not approved because we received an inter-SETA transfer, or anybody not being able to explain to you why there's a delay in your approval.
Yes.
Yes. Any
Thank
other
you for
questions?
the.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay.
Okay, so I guess the silence means that we don't have any more questions. If you guys do have anything, please send me an email, or you can send Julia an email. We'll be happy to help you. And good luck with your submissions. I know this time of the year it's quite hectic, but we're here to assist you. And thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.